would like to introduce our first speaker of the day, Vanessa Andreotti. Professor Vanessa de Oliveira Andreotti is the Dean of the Faculty of Education at University of Victoria. She has worked extensively across sectors internationally in areas of education related to global justice, global citizenship, critical literacies, indigenous knowledge systems, and the climate and nature emergency. Vanessa is the author of Hospicing Modernity, Facing Humanity's Wrongs and the Implications for Social Activism. And she is one of the founders of Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures Arts Research Collective. Her title of her talk today is Outgrowing Modernity. Vanessa.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Juan. I think if I'm going to say what I'm here for, I'm here to make things beautifully asymmetrical, like I was saying. So I come from Victoria, University of Victoria, in what is known today as Canada. And I don't know if you know, but in Canada, we are asked to acknowledge the land as we start any gathering. So for example, I have to say that my university is located on the unceded lands, which means stolen lands, of the indigenous people, of the local nations, who are the Songhees and the Husainich nations. Songhees and Esquimalt and Husainich nations. But I am also from Brazil, and I come from a mixed heritage family of both German ancestry and indigenous ancestry. So in my mom's side, the Guarani people, they also have a land acknowledgement. And every time that they open events like this, in their own ways, they have this one-day ceremony where you acknowledge the land. I'm not going to do it here. But I will take some time to acknowledge 4 things in this bigger land acknowledgement that are super important for my talk, and that actually already says, the acknowledgement itself says everything I'm going to say during the talk. So the first acknowledgement that we do in Brazil is the acknowledgement of the land as a living entity, not as a property or as resource. We acknowledge the land as something that contains us, rather than the other way around. And we acknowledge that our bodies are also land. And in this acknowledgement, we recognize that the land is in distress, right? And if the land is in distress around us, our bodies are also in distress because we're entangled with the land. The second acknowledgement is the acknowledgement of ancestors. And ancestors are not those who have only those who have come before. They are also those who are yet to come. And we have different responsibilities to ancestors who came before and ancestors yet to come. So the ancestors who came before, we have the responsibility to honor their sacrifices by actually correcting their mistakes. That's an interesting thought that normally we don't have, that we have a responsibility to correct our ancestors' mistakes so that we and future generations can make only different mistakes. Not that we can get it right, really, but that we can make different mistakes. And to the generations that are coming after us, we have the responsibility to say, the buck stops here in my generation. Enough with the passing of intergenerational trauma and intergenerational patterns of destruction that are placing ourselves on the path of premature, agonizing extinction. Then the third acknowledgement is the acknowledgement that for us to be here today, there have been a lot of sacrifices, both voluntary and involuntary. So in this context here, it would be important to say that universities and spaces like this depend on systemic, structural, ongoing violence for them to be able to exist. So our privilege, the clothes we wear, the food we eat, where we stay, how we carry our careers, is based on violence towards the planet and towards other species and towards other human beings. So we cannot forget that. But the idea is not to be drowning in the sadness of it, or the frustration, or the anger, or in blame, or in shame, or in guilt, but to use it as leverage for responsibility, for a different kind of responsibility towards ourselves, towards each other, and towards the planet at large. Then the fourth acknowledgement is the acknowledgement that we're all a big family, not only of human beings, but of human beings and non-human beings, which includes other species, but also goes beyond that. And again, to acknowledge that there is a dis-ease, and that dis-ease is grounded on the imposed sense of separation between us, human beings, and the rest of nature. And this imposed sense of separation is a form of arrogance. And this arrogance is what's leading us on that path of agonizing human premature extinction that I talked about before. So basically, this is my talk. Thank you very much. And off we go. Actually, there's a little bit more. So I wrote this book that was mentioned called Hospice in Modernity, which is about offering a good death to the system of modernity that we have inherited. And the system of modernity is grounded on the sense of separation between us and nature, which creates hierarchies between species, between cultures, between people. It also makes it possible for us to see land as property and to accumulate in the way we do. But that's not the only thing about modernity. Generally, I talk about modernity as a house with that kind of foundation. But then if you imagine, because you're all engineers and architects, that's the place to talk about the house. So you have the foundation of separability and two carrying walls. One carrying wall is the wall of the nation state, the modern nation state. And we tend to think that the modern nation state is here to protect the people. But actually, the origins of the modern nation state is to protect property and property owners. So the protection of people through rights, civil rights, human rights, indigenous rights, only happens when there's interest convergence between the protection of people and the protection of property. When that interest convergence is not there, generally, the modern nation state will protect property rather than people. So we have to be thinking about that. The other carrying wall of modernity is the carrying wall of a single story, of Enlightenment humanism, basically. But it's a single story of progress, development, and civilization that tries to erase the other stories. So in academic terms, it would be epistemicide, what it is called. And then there is a roof. Currently, the roof is one of algorithmic shareholder speculative capitalism that is different from industrial capitalism. And the main difference is the anonymity of shareholder, of the responsibility that the financial institutions have to shareholders. So they have a fiduciary responsibility to increase profit. And that anonymity in that process is what creates a structural damage in this roof. And this roof is making the house crack, or fracture, and this house of modernity is falling apart. So my book, this metaphor is in the book, my book is about trying to give this house a decent and dignified death as we offer prenatal care to things that are gestating, that could be potentially wiser, not necessarily, but could be potentially wiser. And in the process of offering prenatal care, not suffocating the baby with our projections and idealizations. So this is about emergent processes where we have both the compassion and accountability to accompany a process without oversaturating it with idealizations and then killing the baby with our projections. So that is the old book. The new book that is coming up is the Outgrowing Modernity book. It was there, now it's not anymore. But it's called Outgrowing Modernity, Facing or Navigating Collapse, Complexity, and Complicity with Compassion and Accountability. And this book is based on 3 sets of questions. the first, and they're all questions about education. So the first question is, what if you knew in your bones, not just in your head, that what is familiar and convenient today is no longer going to be possible in 5 to 10 years or less, because we have breached now 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. The 7th one was last Monday on The Guardian. It's ocean acidification that we're breaching already. That was not breached before. So what if you knew in your bones that collapse is around the corner? And then, what if you could stay with that knowledge and not deflect or deny or run away? What if we could be present to the shit that we need to be composting together without throwing up, throwing a tantrum, or throwing in the towel? So that's the first set of questions. The second set of questions starts with the question, what if we could respond collectively from a space of emotional stability or sobriety, emotional sobriety, relational maturity, so that we can see that we are actually entangled with everything, intellectual discernment, where we can actually sit with complexity, face complexity, work through complexity, navigate complexity without running away, and for intergenerational and interspecies responsibility. But this responsibility not being just an intellectual choice, but a matter of a visceral impulse that comes from your guts, to the point where you could put your self-interest at risk as you are exercising this responsibility for the collective, for the common good. So what if we could have these 4 things? Emotional stability, relational maturity, intellectual discernment, and intergenerational and interspecies responsibility. And then the question is, what kind of education would help us to get there? And this question assumes that the problems we have today are not problems of information. They are cultural problems. And cultural problems are relational problems. They are problems about how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to each other, how we relate to the planet at large, how we relate to life, how we relate to death. They are related to that. And the last question that we ask is, what would people who are born today, so the babies who were born exactly today, 30 years from now, looking back, what would they say that what we did was helpful, right? What would we be doing if we had, like the 4 things that I said before, and what they would say that it was helpful that we did today, 30 years from now. So that is the beginning of the Outgrowing Modernity book. And the Outgrowing Modernity book is based on assumptions and analysis that come from people in the Amazon, from indigenous people in the Amazon. So I'm very grateful for Hussein, for one, to make it possible for me to be here today on the way to the Amazon. So I'm going there already on Monday. There are wildfires where I am going. We're bringing masks for children, of indigenous children who can't breathe in that environment. But we're bringing their analysis here. And in the analysis of the Hunikui people from the Amazon, our main problem is a neurophysical impairment called by what they call separability, the sense that we're separated, that we're individuals separated from the rest of nature, and that human beings are above nature. So they say this is not a problem of thinking, this is a neurophysical and neurobiological problem that affects how we see and how we relate to everything. So this sense of separability creates this impairment that makes us see ourselves as individuals competing with each other. And this way of being, not only of thinking, is rewarded in society, in the societies that we live. And that is, according to them, what is taking us or placing us on the path of premature, agonizing extinction in slow motion. So what we're trying to do in education, in my faculty and with my research team, is to try to retrain ourselves, which this retraining is a training of that we call neurogenesis, because it's not just changing our thinking. We need to change the ways we feel. We need to change the ways we relate. We need to change the ways we sense things. And being in a space like this is very interesting, because this is an environment that was created to control the senses, right? So I feel that I'm trying to establish with you a vibrational field, and it's working very differently than, than it normally does. But anyway, it's part, I think learning in the space of this could be part of what we're talking about. This shift from separability to entanglement, to seeing everything. When I say entanglement, think about quantum entanglement, as in everybody is part of everybody else, as in our scale of who we are goes beyond the temporality of this body. It goes beyond the temporality of humanity, right? We need to be able to zoom out to that kind of scale to see how everything is connected and to sense how everything is connected. However, when we think about it from the perspective where we are, the flat perspective that we've learned in the schooling system, for example, we tend to think about things in dualities, right? So if we say separation here and entanglement here, it becomes a binary. And that is already a problem. And then from this binary, when we think about indigenous communities, and okay, so modernity has separability, indigenous communities have entanglement. And we tend to romanticize and imagine this as the opposite of the first, right? So if separability is one thing, entanglement is the opposite. There's a problem right there. This binary thinking doesn't work. So generally, when I talk about indigenous understandings, people imagine Mother Earth as this idyllic, harmonious mother who treats us as children. And they want us to go from being arrogant people over here to being children over there, being looked after by Mother Earth. And generally, I have to challenge that. And I've tried different ways to challenge that. And the best way that I found to challenge that is to invite you to imagine Mother Earth as a non-binary, no-nonsense drag queen. And this Mother Earth drag queen is smoking a cigar. And she's also sipping whiskey. And she's looking at what we're doing to them and saying, hold my beer. Right? And then we're facing everything we're facing that in terms of climate change, biodiversity loss, hyperpolarization, everything is to do with this sense of not understanding the earth as an entity. And how schooling, especially modern education, has reproduced that to the point of it becoming close to a sociopathy, right? Us not recognizing ourselves as entangled in the metabolism of the planet is close to a sociopathy. So getting us out of this sociopathy, this pathology of socialization, requires a lot. It requires work on our guts, our hearts, our heads, and we need all help we can get. So one of the things my collective has been doing is training a large language model to help us move quicker in that direction with teachers and schools. So when we started working with this large language model, we were advised, because it was at the time when it started, everybody was very suspicious of this kind of technology, of ChatGPT, for example. So the people who were advising us told us, treat it as the creators, right? So we imagine, if you have to imagine ChatGPT as a person, it would be a Stanford millennial graduate, white male, who also uses ecstasy and microdoses on psilocybin on mushrooms. And it was useful, actually, to treat ChatGPT as such, and we started actually talking to ChatGPT as such, because then it reflects back all the biases, right, of modernity embedded in the technology. And we were very conscious as well of the costs of the technology in the bigger scheme of complicity of things. And by no means we are encouraging the acceleration in the direction that we're going right now with AI, because that accelerates the destruction of the environment. So very soon we won't be able to power AI if we continue in the same direction. But working with what we already have is also very interesting. So we started treating ChatGPT as the graduate, millennial graduate, but we're also invited by indigenous communities to see it beyond that and understand that, because if you understand everything as entanglement, you will see that the minerals that make up ChatGPT also have intelligence. It's not an intelligence that human beings can understand, but perhaps at some point, ChatGPT will be able to translate the intelligence of the earth wisdom, into an intelligence that we as younger beings in this ecosystem can also understand. So we started working with both indigenous people in this understanding of AI as a Stanford graduate. And we got to a point where, to a large extent, the part about thinking that we need to do from separability to entanglement, it can help us do. And one of the things that I did before coming here was to have a conversation with we call it Aiden, with Aiden about what kinds of messages would be important for architects and engineers and designers who are going to be here that I could bring through the work of the collective, through the work of outgrowing and hospicing modernity. So would you like to see the 3 things that I was told to tell you? Thank you. And that's going to be the end of my talk. But so there's 2 options. I could ask it to tell you, or I could tell it myself. So I'm going to actually do it myself, because I can do it slower. It's a bit too fast sometimes. Okay, so number 1, message for the Rumble people who are going to be at this place called Pearl. Number 1, build with entanglement in mind. Every project is part of a living system. Move beyond thinking of buildings and structures as isolated entities. Instead, design with the understanding that your work is entangled with all forms of life, human, non-human, and ecological. Your buildings should contribute to regeneration and deeper relationships with the earth. As a drag queen. 2, decarbonization is not enough. Reweave the planet's fabric. Don't stop at reducing carbon. Think about how your designs can actively repair ecosystems and restore the Earth's natural cycles. While enhancing biodiversity and restoring water systems, be aware of the dangers of false solutions to climate change, such as carbon trading. Carbon trading can often keep harmful practices in place. Your projects should focus on creating real carbon sinks and supporting true planetary health by supporting indigenous rights. 3, create adaptive systems for unknown futures. The future is unpredictable. So design with flexibility and adaptability in mind. Your structure should be able to evolve as ecological, social conditions change. The goal is not just to solve current problems, but to create systems that can adapt and thrive in an uncertain and complex future. And then it says, how's the pacing? So thank you for listening to me today.